All right, so we're going into part 4. This week and next week, I'm going to finish this series we started at the end of summer called Christian Cliches, looking at these short statements that we repeat over and over and over again. So often, they're just ingrained, in many cases, into our souls. And often we don't question them. And there's lots of good to these. I want to just continue to say this. Nobody should feel guilty because after this series, we still use some of these cliches. That's the thing about cliches. They capture some bit of truth. And so it's not bad. If you use some of these cliches this morning or yesterday, or if you do later today or tomorrow, does not matter. You don't feel bad. However, unquestioned, some of these cliches can do damage. They can block us from understanding what's happening to us in life and understanding how God works in this world, and they can cause real harm in those ways. So today, I want to talk about 2 big cliches. We've been referring to these kind of building up throughout this series so far. And so the 2 cliches we're going to look at today, number 1, we're going to examine this: everything happens for a reason. Right? Everything happens for a reason. Again, there is definitely some truth to this sometimes. And many Christians over the years, and even now, and some of you, have found tremendous comfort in this cliche. And I don't want to take that away from anyone. At the same time, other Christians have been harmed and experienced pain as a result of some of the thoughts that feed into this cliche. And the other one we want to look at along with this one is the cliche of it's all part of God's plan. All right, so again, to put you at ease, I'm being very careful about this because these 2 cliches I know are very precious to some people. All right, so before I start and say anything more, 2 things I want to say. First of all, sometimes bad things do happen for a reason. So nobody is in the wrong. Nobody has sinned for believing or holding to these cliches. And sometimes bad things could be part of God's plan. The key here is in the sometimes. The problem with these cliches is the everything and the all. That is the problem. Because when you believe that it's all part of God's plan, that every bad thing that happens to you is part of God's plan, that God wanted it to happen, that God's in control and making these things happen, is the next question that comes for many people is this: why would God do this to me? And when I hear Christians having to ask that question in the midst of terrible suffering and dark nights of the soul, I know that we've gone wrong with some of these cliches. Because now you have people who are already suffering. I talk to people all the time here at church. They come and see me. I pray with them. They're going through terrible, terrible things. And in addition to their suffering, they also are questioning, why would a loving God do this to me? And they're forced to ask that question because we aren't allowed to question the ideas that it's all part of God's plan or that everything happens for a reason. And another thing that can happen when you believe that it's all part of God's plan is many Christians go down this road of starting to blame themselves. If everything happens for a reason, when bad things start to happen to you, Christians start to ask the question, well, maybe God's punishing me. And this is another one I often hear with people from church. No small amount of you have been here at the office with me, praying with me, and asking me the question, why would God do this to me? And now, in addition to the suffering you're going through, you're having to have this kind of anxiety looking at your life. What have I done? What have I done to make this happen to me? In addition to you're already going through pain, you now have to question, maybe I made this happen, or maybe it's something bad I did, or maybe I didn't pray or do whatever spiritual things enough. Now, there are many reasons, there are many things that feed into why we believe these cliches. But one of them has to do with the way, it's not because of you guys, it's because of people like me, it's us pastors. It has to do with the way we preach the Bible in a very overly simplistic way. And one of the main examples of how we preachers, not you guys are not to blame, but one of the main stories in the Bible of how us preachers often preach overly simplistically that feeds directly into some of these problems comes with the story of Joseph. And so I want to do a little dive here in the first part of this message into the story of Joseph and the way we take things that are really beautiful in the story of Joseph, but then oversimplify them in ways that harm many Christians. All right, so quick review. Let's do a quick review of the three main events. You're going to look at the Joseph story a little bit differently. Not totally differently, but a little differently, I think, for the rest of your life after this sermon. All right? Let's look at the three main events, or the three main things that happen in Joseph's life. So the first two are horrible things. So the first thing, Genesis chapter 37, Joseph is sold into slavery, which is bad enough. I mean, slavery, that's horrible. To be sold into slavery by your brothers, really bad. In addition to the badness of slavery, you have the betrayal of family members, all right? So that's really bad. That's a defining moment in Joseph's life, Genesis 37. But that's not the end of the bad things that happen to Joseph. And in Genesis 39, Joseph actually starts to be successful in his slavery, works his way up. He's actually in a good position for his master Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him, right, of trying to assault her, and he gets thrown in prison. So now we have two betrayals. He's been betrayed into slavery by his brothers, and then he's been wrongfully accused, he's been lied about, and now he's thrown in a prison, in a dungeon in Egypt. So these are two really bad defining moments that happen over years. All right, so these are terrible things. Again, famous story. But it's not the final act. In the final act of his story, we get the Hollywood ending. And for the rest of your life, I want you to remember this. It's a Hollywood ending on steroids. All right? In fact, some of us, after you watch enough Hollywood endings, you start to go, ugh. It's like formulaic. Joseph's story is Hollywood to the max. First he's in slavery, then he's thrown in prison. But then in the end, he's brought out of prison. But he's not just brought out of prison and he lives a normal life the rest of his life. He's the second in command over all of Egypt. He's wildly wealthy. He saves the entire Middle East from a famine, gets married, has kids, right? And goes on, and then gets reunited and reconciled with his terrible, horrible, unhealthy family. This is the ultimate happy ending. Every bad thing in Joseph's life gets flipped around and turns into something awesomely good. And in the end, then, he also forgives his brothers. Now, this is where we're going to pick up now. So now we're going to go to Genesis 50. And I want us to look at how Joseph is responding to some of the most famous statements anywhere in the Bible at the end of his big Hollywood ending. All right? So let's just go and read a little bit of the story. Genesis 50. All right? So this is the end of Joseph's story. So he's in charge of Egypt now. He's wealthy. He's successful. And now his family has come. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So two things I want you to notice. First of all, his brothers are scared of him. Imagine how good that would feel. This is what we all want. Deep down, we don't admit it. But someone hurts you, and then down the road, you have power over them, and they're scared of you. Oh, that feels good. I actually don't know what that feels like, but I can imagine what it would feel like. And second thing, so not only are his brothers who did horrible things to him scared of him, they know that what they did was wrong and pays us back for all the wrongs we did. They actually admit. Again, this is another amazing feeling. This is an amazing, amazing feeling when someone who's hurt you actually recognizes that what they did was wrong. But how often, by the way, does this not happen in life? Some of the people who hurt us, the things that drive us the most nuts, is sometimes the people who hurt us actually think we're the ones in the wrong. Isn't that crazy? And we do that to others as well. But Joseph, part of his Hollywood ending, his brothers are scared of him, and they know we did wrong. That's amazing. So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. Lie. But at least it's a good kind of lie. It's not like a lie to hurt him. It's a lie because they know they're in the wrong. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers, right? So they don't want to die. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly, but they also mean it. Look at what they say next. Now, please forgive. Please forgive. Please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. Again, how amazing would this feel? And it gets even better. Oh, by the way, let's just talk about vindication. Yeah. Timing was wrong. This would have felt way better if I'd said it first. Anyway, this is called vindication, by the way. Vindication is one of the most amazing feelings any of us can ever feel. It is literally one of the best feelings you could ever feel, is to feel vindicated. Vindication is the feeling you have when people who have wronged you publicly admit, it's not private, so everybody can see, publicly admit they were wrong, and everyone gets to see that you were in the right. When this happens, it is a wonderful feeling. It's also a rare feeling. And lots of people never get to feel vindicated. Joseph actually got to feel vindicated. We go on. This is vindication on steroids. Look at this. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. So imagine the people who've hurt you most in your life throwing themselves before you. We are your slaves. I mean, if this was a dream, you wouldn't want to wake up. This is DEFCON 1 nuclear vindication. This is our wildest, darkest dream of revenge and vindication. This is, yes, you did horrible things to me. You feel bad. You're begging me for forgiveness. I am publicly vindicated. This feels amazing. And now, out of all of this vindication, Joseph responds, all right? So he says, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And now we get this next statement is this climactic statement that is so powerful and so inspiring. And, well, let's just read it, okay? Here we go. Joseph says, you intended to harm me. I mean, this is just powerful. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Right? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And here's where we preachers, we build and put this at the end of the message. We build. And I would say, powerful. Everybody's weeping. We maybe have a story of someone else where something like this happened. And then we say, everything that happens for a reason. And we say it's all part of God's plan. And then we tell you all, and now you need to do what Joseph did. You need to forgive and say these amazing things like Joseph said. The problem with all of this is that Joseph's story is not everybody's story. Joseph's story, yes, the cliches were true in his story. In Joseph's case, everything did happen for a reason. In Joseph's story, it all was part of God's plan. But Joseph's story is not everyone's story. And I'm going to tell you why that's important. Let's first of all look at some of the ways in which, there are many ways Joseph's story is not everyone's story. But let's just look at the first one. And let's admit that actually life is a lot more complex than one Bible story representing every human story. First of all, not everybody's suffering makes sense. And for us as preachers to pretend when we preach that Joseph's story represents everybody is a vast oversimplification. I mean, literally in Joseph's life, Joseph's story is actually rare. In Joseph's story, literally every event, bad event, literally leads direct straight line to the good things that happened after. He gets sold into slavery. That's what gets him to Egypt, where he has to be. He gets wrongfully accused of assault. he gets thrown into prison. That's where he meets Pharaoh's cupbearer. That's how he gets introduced to Pharaoh, and that's how he saves the world and becomes this amazing story happens. Literally, Joseph can look back, and by the way, this doesn't make Joseph bad. It doesn't make his statements at the end of his life any less amazing. They're still amazing, but the point is, we expect ourselves to be able to do something when our stories aren't all like his. Not everybody's story makes sense. By the way, I'm not just making this up. I mean, I can find you lots of stories in the Bible of people whose stories didn't make sense. But let's use the most obvious one. Let's contrast again Joseph and Job. Did Job's sufferings make sense like Joseph's? Joseph's suffering, I'm in slavery, I'm in Egypt, I go to prison, I meet the cupbearer, I meet Pharaoh, ta-da, it's all great. Job, all 7 of his kids are killed. What bigger plan did that accomplish? Nothing, no bigger plan. What greater good came out of Job suffering horrific health issues, painful, debilitating, degrading health issues? What better good did Job experience as a result of those health issues? Nothing. None of it. In fact, the whole point of Job's book is that Job's complaint is it doesn't make sense. And in the end, there's no answer that it does. That's the whole point of Job's book, is sometimes we just suffer. Sometimes, or we should say actually lots of time, suffering around the world is just suffering. When mass shootings happen at a school and a bunch of kids are killed, what greater plan is God doing there? Nothing. What good could offset the evil of a bunch of people being killed senselessly? When citizens in Israel have to fear terrorist attacks, when children in Gaza have to starve, what greater plan is happening in the midst of that? What greater plan is happening when stupid wars for stupid reasons go on for years on end in places like Ukraine, and millions of people suffer horribly, losing family members? What greater good could be worth an evil that terrible? The fact of the matter is, Job shows us something powerful, lots and horrible about this world. Lots of suffering around the world is just that. It's just suffering. No greater good would be worth those kinds of evils. Yet, many Christians, because we have these cliches, feel a burden of spiritual pressure that when I go through shattering, dark times in my life, I have to be able to feel and say like Joseph, it's all part of some better plan, even though I don't feel that, even though I don't see that. Because we think our story is Joseph's story. Joseph's story isn't ours, and not all suffering makes sense. Which is why I'm glad the Bible gives us other options. You can be a Job, not just a Joseph. And this brings up the second thing. Not everybody's suffering makes sense. Not everybody gets a happy ending. Like, this just needs to be said in church. Not everybody gets Joseph's ending. And this is where we preachers do you guys a disservice. Because we like to preach sermons with principles and laws. Here's the Joseph principle. Here's the David principle. And we give you universal laws that are meant to apply to everybody's life from one person's story. The reason the Bible gives us many, many different stories is because life isn't that simple. And wisdom means discerning. God, how are you at work in a life story like this? How are you at work in a life story like that? Not everybody gets a happy ending like Joseph, which is why the writer of Ecclesiastes complains about this over and over again. Thank God for Ecclesiastes. Too many of us stay away from this book. Here's Ecclesiastes 7. I'll show you 2 passages. In this meaningless life of mine, you didn't think you'd read that in the Bible, I have seen both of these. Both. The righteous perishing in their righteousness, come on. And the wicked living long in their wickedness. You know what? Joseph would have read this verse and says, nuh-uh. Joseph would have read this verse and said, nuh-uh. Because that wasn't his experience. His experience was, if you have your integrity and you do right and you just plug away and do it, it all turns out good. And the writer of Ecclesiastes says, well, yeah, that does happen sometimes, and it happened for you, Joseph. That does not happen for everybody. He says it again in the next chapter, just in case we're not getting it. He says this, there is something else meaningless that occurs on the earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. I want you to notice, this is the exact opposite of the statement, everything happens for a reason. The writer of Ecclesiastes, by the way, it's in the Bible, so we Christians kind of believe it's inspired. Right? We like to pick the verses we think are inspired and the other ones we just ignore and never read. This is the exact opposite of everything happens for a reason. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, actually, some stuff is just senseless. It's absolutely senseless. Some of you are going, this is depressing. This is reality. It's going to get more hopeful. Here's the problem with not being real. When we try to be positive, but it's positivity disconnected from reality, when our feet are not planted firmly on a foundation of reality, when the waves of reality come crashing, we will get a rude awakening call, and that's worse. Because it can actually disorient us from reality. We can lose our foundation entirely. So, we can't expect ourselves to respond like Joseph when our stories are different. Okay, so now let's just take, I love Joseph, and I'm not in heaven. I don't want him to beat me up. All right? But we have this view of Joseph like Joseph is practically a saint. I want to knock him down just a rung. He's amazing. He is amazing. But he's not as amazing as we preachers have preached him. Let me show you that. I want to just show you two things. Joseph is not as amazing as you think. Still wonderful. Better than me. But he's not as amazing as you think. Number one, Joseph's statement of forgiveness came after his brothers repent. You ever pay attention to this? It came after. His actual journey of forgiveness is a little more complicated than we usually talk about. What did he do when his brothers first showed up? Falsely accused them of stealing, threw one of them in his dungeons, and kept him as a hostage for like a year. Meanwhile, scared the absolute bejeebers out of the rest of them and sent them home. Barely. And then he came back and he did it again. All right? Because he didn't know if they were actually sorry. And he wasn't sure if he was going to forgive them if they weren't. So, yes, is it amazing that he forgave his brothers? It is absolutely amazing he forgave his brothers. But can we just admit something here? It's a lot harder when you have to forgive people who aren't sorry, isn't it? And the fact of the matter is, I'm hearing some mm-hms now. That's just good. I don't need to hear them. I don't mean that. But you're getting it. When the preacher gets up and tells you, you got to do like Joseph, meanwhile, the people in your life don't even admit they were wrong and think you're the bad guy for the terrible things they did to you. I'm not saying we shouldn't work to forgiveness. We all need to forgive. Jesus forgave on the cross. That's amazing. But let's not pretend that what Joseph did is just going to be how easy it is for the rest of us. Please, if the worst people in your life threw themselves at your feet, it would be easier to forgive. Some things you might still have trouble forgiving, but if you got what Joseph got, you'd be able to forgive a lot more too. And I'll just put that up there. Joseph's forgiveness story was messy, took years, and was made easier by the fact that his brothers felt bad, repented, and begged for forgiveness. Now, it's still amazing that he said he forgave them. Great. But it's a slight rung down from how we sometimes talk about him. And this brings up one other thing. Joseph makes this amazing statement. Oh, you intended to harm me. God intended it for good. Did he say that while he was in prison or after he's one of the wealthiest men in the world and has saved the world from famine? It's after. Joseph's statement about God's good plan came after everything turned out amazing. Guess what? after everything turns out amazing, it gets a little easier to look back and see, oh yeah, it was all part of a plan. You know, the billionaire who failed 10 times at business can sit on his yacht and give an interview on some program and say, oh, failure, you're just failing forward. It's just another step to success. It's all just a learning thing. Yeah, that's easy for the billionaire to say. The guy who's still bankrupt should maybe give up on being a business person. Like if you failed 10 times and you're still bankrupt, but you hear the billionaire say, it's just a learning experience, keep going, maybe you should try a different tack. In the same way, pretending that Joseph's statements are what I'm supposed to say in the midst of something that makes no sense to me is itself not what the Bible is teaching us. Which is why we go back to Ecclesiastes and we bring up the point of both. Both. In this meaningless life of mine, we looked at this passage before, but I want to highlight this word both, which looks really weird when you just start really looking at it and saying it over and over again. But anyway, in this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these. Both. It's not one, it's not the other. The righteous perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living in their wickedness. Both, which brings up a point very similar to a point I made in a message a couple of weeks ago, and that is this. Both. Life gives both beautiful and cruel endings. Here's the thing. Christians who are in this group, the Christians in this group, by the way, there's Christians in both these groups in this room, and there's Christians who have been in both of these groups in these rooms. There's Christians who have spent more of their time in this group, and there's Christians who have spent more of their time in this group. Nobody should feel ashamed because life has given them more beautiful things and endings. You shouldn't feel bad. You should feel thankful. At the same time, here's what can happen with Christians who are in the beautiful camp. We think it's because of the way we prayed, our faith, yada. That's why. We think it's because of us. This is what we humans do. And we preachers often preach from this. And we have 3 steps. Here's 3 steps to this. Here's 5 steps to this. And then you can be in this camp. And then all the Christians in this camp feel horrible. I know a person, good friend of mine, had very serious cancer. Very, very serious. Of course, we were all praying. Lots of people were praying. His family was praying. He was praying. We were praying. Goes through a major, major, major surgery, like crazy. Comes out of it. Survives. And we're all like, as we should, grateful. Thank you, God. Oh, this is amazing. You answered our prayers. And remember, one time we were celebrating, and he says to me very quietly, just me and him, he said, you know, it's interesting. There was another guy in my room, also a Christian. Also, everybody was praying for him. Also, he was praying. He's dead. That isn't supposed to make us feel guilty for this, but here's what can happen when you're in this group. You start to wonder, is it me? Because everybody around you tells you the stories of, I prayed, and look, I got healed. And you go, oh, so I guess you had more people praying for you? You had better people praying for you? You had more faith? Do you see what can happen? I'm not saying we should never be ashamed to be in this group, but we have to be able to hold a little bit more of a complexity as Christians and a little bit of a wisdom, because what happens is people in this group can feel like they are the problem. And of course, people, my life is more in this beautiful group. I have an easy life compared to many. It's very easy for us to have the pride of, well, it's me. It's just me. Life gives both. Joseph was in this one. Job was in this one. There's a bunch of other. John the Baptist, Samuel, Jeremiah, the King Josiah. I could go on and on. All Hebrews 11 says some people of faith overcame and did this and did that, and a whole bunch of them, we're going to read Hebrews 11, we don't have time to go there today, and a whole bunch of them wandered destitute in this world, and this world was not worthy of them. They had suffering, horrible lives. Both happen. I think of a story. I was reading, I want to move to the next point, but this reality thing. I feel like as Christians sometimes, we try to force ourselves. It's like we live in reality. There's a part of us that knows reality is a certain way, but then we feel like we're trying to make reality something different than it is because we think we're supposed to somehow from Scripture. And then we end up denying what many, many people experience. I was reading a book on suffering just the other week. Wonderful Christian lady went through some horrible things in her life, and some of the beauty she experienced in all of that. And these are the kinds of stories I've heard here at Crossview, but I can't, they're too personal, they're too close. I can't share them. But she had literally hundreds of people from Canada and the United States write emails to her as she was writing this book, because she was known, she had given some talks and written some other books. And some of the stories that Christians wrote to her, people who loved Jesus, and you say, how do you apply everything happens for a reason, or it's all part of God's good plan, to this story? One woman wrote in, she had stage 4 cancer. And the whole church was praying, she was praying, her family was praying. It was amazing. And through her treatments, she got over her cancer, got to the 5-year anniversary, got to the 10-year anniversary, which is kind of the big one for cancer. If you get to 10 years and there's no cancer, it looks like you're in the clear. She gets the 10-year anniversary. All of her family and friends in church are celebrating. This is amazing. Like, God's healed us. And almost right after, one of the very next days, her husband, who was perfectly healthy, drops dead of a brain bleed. Is she supposed to say, well, this is all part of God's good plan? Like, he planned to deliver me miraculously, and he answered all these prayers, and then just so my husband could die? Like, is that a Joseph story or is that a Job story? Another woman, her son, I think he was in his 20s, but young adult, died of lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life, loved Jesus. Meanwhile, other people live to 90, and they smoke and drink heavily every day. Not all of that is part of some amazing, wonderful plan of God's. So you say, well, surely there must be hope. Like, you can't send us home on this. This is too dark. So how do we find hope in light of the reality that life gives both beautiful and cruel endings? How do we find hope? Well, Romans 8. And some of you are, no, he didn't go there. Some of you are, yes, I love that verse. Others of you are like, I hate that verse. Right? Famous verse. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This is a hopeful verse, but it also does not mean some of the things we sometimes make it to mean. So before I tell you what this verse means, let me give you 3 things it does not mean. This verse does not mean that God makes bad things happen to you. I heard a pastor once share a story, person in his congregation, mother, driving along a road, logging truck comes by, log comes off the truck through the windshield, kills her. And this pastor found it very comforting to say, and that was all part of God's plan. Not bad for him to say. You can also see how in Christian theology, many of our theologies are actually formed out of our fears. Some Christians, their biggest fear is that of chaos and disorganization, and they would rather have God do bad things than for things to just happen. I'm more of the mind, if God can do bad things, I can't trust him. If God is actually good, he can walk with us in bad things. But God does not do bad things. God does not make bad things happen to you. God does not plan the bad things that happen to you. And not everything that happens to you. Notice the not. By the way, if some of you are taking a picture of this, you're going, what is he saying? Notice the not. Not everything that happens to you is good for you. Childhood abuse is not good for anyone. Nobody ever looks back on childhood abuse or sexual abuse or a loved one got murdered. No one ever looks back and then goes, oh, that's so good. I'm so glad I went through that. That was good for me. It's not good for you. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, some wounds in life leave us with a limp. However, that does not mean your life is over. Here's what Romans 8:28 does tell us. God will help you find good in your life after evil occurs. You're not even forced. Sometimes you might be able to find good in the evil thing. Like Joseph, the evil things actually directly led to that, led to this. In his story, it was nice and clean, just wonderful. I can see this bad event led to this good thing happening. Without these things happening, this couldn't have happened. Not everything is like that. Some things are. Whatever the case, Romans 8:28 promises us that God will be with you to help you find good in your life after the evil occurs. And so I'm going to leave you with 4 quick points. Finding good in the aftermath of trauma, tragedy, and evil. First step in the aftermath of trauma, tragedy, and evil, just allow yourself to be shattered. This is what Job shows us. You don't have to try to be Joseph. You don't have to put on a good face. Oh, this is all part of God's good plan. And inside you are shattered. You don't know how you're going to go on living. You're actually allowed, when bad things happen in this life, you're allowed to be shattered. Second thing, let yourself be weak. You don't need to pretend to be strong. You don't need to pretend to be happy. You don't need to pretend that you can do this on your own. In fact, when we go through terrible things, that's actually when we experience God, is when people come around us. And we collapse in their arms and experience God's love through them as God ministers to us through the love of his people. Don't rush to have faith. Now, at a certain point, you come through that. You can't be shattered for 20 years. At a certain point, there's no formula for this, but when the time is right, you realize there's a point now, I feel that strength. God is at work. I'm getting to that point now where I do need to move forward at some point. And this is where you come to acceptance. Job had to work through this. You know what acceptance is? When you finally come to the place of, this thing happened. It's not my fault. I can't change it. You finally just come to acceptance. This thing happened. It's not my fault. And if it is your fault, you have to forgive yourself at some point. And I can't change it. Now I have to move forward. And then you find purpose in the moving forward. Now, some people find purpose in their pain. One person, they go through abuse in childhood. Later on, they turn that around and they work with people who go through abuse. Some people find purpose in the pain. Other people, they just have to leave that behind. They have to do something else. But the fact of the matter is, as long as you are alive and breathing, Romans 8:28 says that in all things God can work good. It doesn't mean that what happened to you is good, but it means that there is still life ahead of you for you to find beautiful things in life, for you to do good things in life. And whether you use your pain to help others, because by the way, someone who's been through a divorce can help people who are divorced far better than someone who just has a happy marriage. And someone who's been abused can touch other abuse victims better than someone who never has been. But even if that's too painful for you, you can find purpose somewhere. As long as you're alive, God can work all things for good. I want you all to bow your heads with me and close your eyes. And here at Crossview, we like to just take a minute, just take a breath, and just reflect before we leave and get back out into the world. What is one thing God might want you to take home with you today? What is one thing God might be saying to you today? Thank you, Father, that your word includes stories like Joseph's, but also like Job's. Like David's, also John the Baptist. Like Moses, but also Jeremiah. Your word really gives us the full gamut of both. Life can be beautiful and life can be cruel. But we can be there for each other, and you will be with us in both. I pray that you would empower us to be a more compassionate, respectful group of Christians who don't judge others for being in the cruel group and don't get proud for being in the ones where the life is looking pretty beautiful. Thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you for this church, and thank you. We're now officially praying for lunch. It will not be a sin to just begin eating. Thank you for sausage burgers and food and fellowship and friends here at Crossview. In Jesus' name, amen.